Hello wonderful person, this is Anton, and in this video we're going to discuss this very strange mystery that was only discovered back in 2023 or just under 2 years ago, and that was surprisingly hiding in plain sight. One of the most bizarre objects discovered in the last decade, and that is still kind of difficult to explain. Here I'm referring to this very bizarre blue shape. And the galaxy you see in the background, that's the Andromeda. And well, technically, we've discussed this already back in 2023, but since then, nobody actually still has any idea exactly what this is. Except that in this new study, researchers propose one potential explanation and provide very intriguing evidence, possibly explaining this as very strange leftovers of a dying star. And so let's talk about the discovery and the explanation in a bit more detail, starting with one very simple question. Why exactly was this only discovered in 2023, and how did everyone miss this until now? And the answer is really simple. This object is really large. So large, as a matter of fact, that most telescopes basically were looking through it and could not see the whole object because it was just covering way too much space. In other words, it's so large and so spread out that for the most telescopes it's completely invisible because normally they're designed to focus on a much smaller part of the night skies. But completely by accident, in 2023, a team of 3 amateur astronomers used relatively small telescopes and very specific filters to basically discover and analyze this, creating this beautiful image, with this object now referred to as SDSO-1, named after the original discoverers, Strottner, Drechsler, Sainty. So basically this is Strottner, Drechsler, Sainty Object 1. And so large telescopes like the Hubble that have a very narrow field of view completely missed this for decades, even though this is literally right next to the Andromeda galaxy that you see in the background. But in 2023, the French astrophotographer Yann dedicated approximately 111 hours exposing a single area of the night skies because he was basically focusing on taking a beautiful picture of the Andromeda. But because he also used a specialized filter, completely by accident he found this very strange arc. But one of the main reasons this arc was visible was because the filter blocked all of the light except for the glow from doubly ionized oxygen, basically oxygen atoms that lost 2 electrons, forming what's known as the +2 ions. And in astronomy this is very important for indicating extremely high energy environments, such as for example various nebula or even active galaxies. And so usually this oxygen emits green light. As a matter of fact, historically, this phenomenon was actually mistaken for a new element referred to as nebulium. But in reality this is formed by very intense UV radiation from a lot of hot stars or quasars. And normally we use these nebula to determine physical conditions in the environment around this object, determining the density of material and temperature. Fun fact, nebulium was proposed back in 1864 by the astronomer William Huggins, which he proposed as the explanation for this bizarre green glow observed in the famous Cat's Eye Nebula. But it was this wonderful person, Ira Bowen, that definitively proved that it was just oxygen that lost 2 electrons. And so nebulium basically never existed. And the other reason why this object was invisible to other telescopes was because they are usually designed to look for hydrogen, not oxygen. Specifically, they focus on hydrogen alpha emissions, which help scientists map the galaxies and the universe around us. And that's actually what makes this bizarre object so unique, as SDSO-1 seems to contain almost no hydrogen. It is essentially a giant oxygen cloud that appears as some kind of a very broad streak of light, as if someone took an oxygen paint and then took a brush and spread it across, which is why it remained a mystery for at least 2 years now. And actually the biggest mystery here is we don't even know where exactly it's located. Is this between Andromeda and the Milky Way, or is this inside our own galaxy, somewhere much closer to us? And so when this object was initially announced, almost right away astronomers were divided on its exact location. For example, if this cloud is physically near the Andromeda galaxy, it would be approximately 100,000 light years long, making it one of the largest such structures ever seen. As a matter of fact, it would make it one of the most unusual structures ever discovered. In this case, what would even create such an enormous oxygen cloud? With other researchers suggesting that this could be some kind of a shock wave caused by the halos of the Milky Way and the Andromeda galaxies as they collide with one another. As you might know, the Andromeda and the Milky Way are actually on the collision course, and so maybe this was their shock wave. But the initial measurements of the cloud's velocity potentially disprove that. Here, by discovering how fast this is moving toward or away from us, scientists discovered that it was only moving at 10 kilometers per second. For comparison, the Andromeda is moving at 300 kilometers per second. And so this huge difference suggests that this was not part of the Andromeda and was unlikely to be a shockwave. And because it was only 10 kilometers per second, this was more likely to be inside the Milky Way and was just in the same part of the night skies completely by accident. Which takes us to this new study from just a few weeks ago that tries to tackle this mystery once again, but this time even finds a few additional examples from somewhere else. And so here, according to this new study, led by Patrick Ogle, or Ogle, sorry Patrick, not sure about your name right now, offers us a compelling fact-based explanation and proposes that SDSO-1 is what's known as a ghost planetary nebula, a GPN. And to understand this, let's briefly discuss planetary nebula. Here's actually one of the most famous ones, the Southern Ring Nebula. And so in a standard planetary nebula, we have some kind of a dying star very similar to our Sun that starts shedding outer layers, with the star itself very slowly transforming into a white dwarf. And so here these layers start to glow because the radiation from the central object is extremely ionizing. But eventually a lot of these nebulas expand so much that they become very thin and are very difficult to see. And so after about 20,000 years, they completely fade away. And so basically all of these objects will eventually become practically invisible. And so in this new study, the team argues that this is essentially the same phenomenon, but instead we're looking at a gas that's approximately 400,000 years old. In other words, this is a remnant of a very old planetary nebula. And normally it would be invisible, but because of very specific conditions, it seems to be visible because this gas finds itself in just the right environment. But then the question is, okay, so where's that star? Where's the original star that created the nebula? And in this study, researchers believe it's e.g. Andromeda. You can kind of see it right there. And it just so happens that this particular star system seems to be moving through the galaxy at what's known as hypersonic speed, approximately 107 kilometers per second. And as a result of this ancient nebula seems to ram into the local interstellar gas, which then creates a ball shock similar to a wake of a ship moving through water, which then heats up the oxygen and makes it glow again. But the question is, okay, so where's the evidence? Well, first of all, this particular star system seems to be located exactly in the center of the structure, and the direction the star is moving across the sky points exactly toward the arc of the nebula. This image right here shows us the star and the shockwave itself. And on top of this, some of the deep images revealed a 145 light-year long turbulent tail that seems to contain a lot of gas and seems to be trailing behind the star, crossing over the face of the Andromeda galaxy from our perspective. In other words, here we have a star that seems to be losing a lot of matter and seems to be creating a shockwave. Additionally, researchers from the study managed to find a few more examples of very similar structures that seem to be very similar in shape and even seem to form extremely similar colors and are known to have been formed by planetary nebula. All of them seem to contain these shock tail structures, and all of them are the result of the interaction between the planetary nebula as it rams into the interstellar medium and then starts to glow. This right here is probably one of the most famous examples, the nebula referred to as HFG-1, which does provide quite a lot of evidence that maybe this is exactly what we're seeing here. But naturally, because this is a brand new discovery, and because we still don't really know much about these objects, not everyone in the scientific community agrees yet. As a matter of fact, the debate has officially started, because other researchers believe that because the gas here is only moving at 20 kilometers per second, it might be a little bit too slow to be a violent bull shock, and instead might be something else entirely. And so other teams suggest that all of this gas is actually energized by nearby stars and is not a shockwave as a result of motion. Regardless of this is still a really important discovery for astronomy. And mostly because we really have no idea exactly what this is. If this is a galactic ghost nebula, it represents a newly discovered phase of a star death that we never knew we could see. Something that will require additional analysis and additional observations. And so here this opens up a window into how a lot of stars eventually return their star stuff to the rest of the galaxy, basically recycling the material to form new stars and new planets. But instead, if this turns out to be an intergalactic object, it would be even more mysterious and would prove to us that the space between galaxies is way more active than we thought and seems to be way more crowded than we ever imagined, possibly containing even more gas and more material that's right now interacting between the Andromeda and the Milky Way. In summary, SDSO-1 definitively shows us that even some of the most famous objects in the night skies, such as the Andromeda galaxy, still seem to hold massive secrets that were completely missed by everyone for several centuries, and was really the incredible work from the amateur astronomers that finally allowed astronomers to discover them, which obviously highlights the importance of amateur astronomy that brings a completely different approach and different perspective to studying all of this. But because this is only the second study about this object, it will probably take some time to figure out exactly what this is and how this was produced. So even after 2 years, this is still a mystery, which means that we'll come back and discuss this more once there are additional studies. Until then, thank you for watching, subscribe, come back tomorrow to learn something else, support this channel on Patreon where you can find additional videos without any ads and can DM me directly, or by joining the channel membership that grants you early access. You can also support this channel by buying the Wonderful Person t-shirt in the description below. Stay wonderful, I'll see you tomorrow, and as always, bye bye.